Now, as you can see, this is a very long video. I'm trying to go in depth and explain what the controls do as I map them. And if you really don't feel like sitting around for the video, you can follow the guide to about 4 minutes in, and then I'll upload the configuration file so you can just drop that into JoyToKey. Okay, so on my old channel, I had a video explaining how to use a controller with the PC version of Oblivion. And since then, people have pointed out that I could have done a bit of a better job explaining things. And also, since then, I've also changed the way the configuration I have. So I figured I'd redo that video on this channel and probably link it to my old channel or on the old video. And what I do is simply put, I use a program called JoyToKey, which translates input on your controller to input on the keyboard. So if I were to press up on the controller analog stick, it would press W on the keyboard, or would tell the computer that W is being pressed. And I'm going to be basically covering Xbox 360 and Xbox One controllers, but this works with pretty much whatever controller that you can get Windows to recognize. Now, if you're using a PlayStation 3 controller, I recommend you use a tool called SCP Server, which kind of tells the computer that the connected PS3 controller is actually an Xbox 360 controller, which makes things a lot easier, especially in games that automatically recognize Xbox 360 and Xbox One controllers and automatically configure them. They don't usually do that for PS3 controllers, so SCP Server is a good all-around tool to use no matter what when you're using a PS3 controller on your PC. The first thing you're going to want to do is disable Oblivion's native controller support. So go on over to your Documents, My Games, Oblivion, open up oblivion.ini, and hit Control F. And then what you want to type is joystick, and you'll get over to the controller section and find where it says B use joystick. It's probably going to be 1 by default. You're going to want to make that 0, and then Control S or File Save to save it and exit out. Okay, something you also may want to do if you're following this guide in particular is swap your Oblivion controls, your Oblivion keyboard controls, to be a little more like Skyrim's, because that's actually how I have mine configured, because I do occasionally use a keyboard and mouse. So I have activate as E instead of space. I have ready weapon as R instead of F. Jump is space instead of E, and change view is F instead of R. Now that's the way I've configured mine. You don't have to configure yours this way, but do keep that in mind when we're mapping keys in JoyToKey. So I'm going to X out here. Okay, so obviously you're going to want to download JoyToKey. So I'll link the website here, and you just download the latest version, preferably from joytokey.net. I don't like going to third-party download sites. And as you can see, I've downloaded it a couple times here, but I'm going to save it to my desktop. And I'm going to minimize this. And JoyToKey doesn't actually have an installer. It just runs wherever you extract it. So I'm going to extract it here. Actually, let me delete that and hit extract here, because it extracts to its own folder automatically. So when I open up JoyToKey, I get everything I need in this folder. So what I usually do is I stick JoyToKey in another folder somewhere and just put a shortcut on my desktop. You could put it wherever you want to, it doesn't matter. So what you want to do now is just turn on your 360 or Xbox One controller or PS3 controller, whatever controller you're using, and open up JoyToKey. Now, I'm not going to open up this version since I already have another version here that I have all my profiles automatically saved on. So I'm going to open up that. All right. And here I have a list of profiles that I can set up, and I have over here the configuration for those profiles, and I'll go over that in a second. And that's something I actually didn't do on the old video. I just kind of let people copy and paste, which wasn't really a good idea. And I'll also upload this particular configuration to something like Dropbox so you can download it. Okay, so instead of kind of messing around with this, I'm going to create a new profile. And Usually I just type the game I'm creating it for. I like my Elder Scrolls to be in alphabetical order, that's why I name them TES. And then I put an underscore and the controller I'm configuring it for. So I'm just going to bone controller, and I'll do 2 because I already have a Xbone controller set up already. So actually let me go ahead and open this, expand it a little more. And when I first create my profile, I go to options, and under here where it says stick/point of view, I hit the drop down and I click show all axes, and then I check configure 8-way for point of view. Now point of view is your D-pad. Okay, threshold for input is basically the dead zone for each stick. So I have stick 1, my left analog stick, and stick 2, my right analog stick. This is useful for 360 controllers especially. It is actually useful for all controllers, but definitely 360 controllers because the analog sticks tend to get old and they tend to stick in a certain direction, and that can exceed the dead zone, so you'll end up kind of rotating when you're not even pressing anything on the stick. So what I like to do is for the Xbox One controller, I typically stick the dead zones at 30 and 30, and you may want to increase those dead zones if you're noticing that your character is moving on his own. And if you don't like the fact that you have to push the analog stick oh so far to get it to register an input, you can decrease the dead zones. And I leave the rest of this default. Now I'm going to go over to joystick 1. So if you press a button here, you'll notice that it highlights the button I'm pressing. Okay, so I'm going to start configuring my JoyToKey settings. Okay, so I'm going to click stick 1 here, and this left arrow indicates that whatever you map here is going to happen when you hit left on the first analog stick or the left analog stick. So if I open this up, I see I have several emulation options here. And you have keyboard, keyboard 2, which is a little more in-depth, mouse, which is obviously wheel rotation and cursor movement, as you can see. And you have a bunch of settings down here. You have here mouse 2, which you can actually go to a very specific point when you press a button. And you have special here, which I'll get into later, but as you can see here, you can shift to joystick 1 between joystick 1 and 2 while pressing a button, which is actually pretty useful and actually what we're going to use here. Or you can just completely load another configuration, which I don't really use. So under keyboard here, you can see I have 4 possible inputs. So if I hit A, so when I hit left on the analog stick, it'll tell the computer that A is being pressed on the keyboard. And I can actually have multiple inputs here, and these are in order too. So basically what will happen is when I hit left on the analog stick, it'll tell the computer that I'm hitting A, then J, then K very quickly. But I'm not going to do that for this. I'm going to clear these out and go to keyboard 2. Alright, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to press for 1, shift, then A, then left arrow. And then for 2, I'm going to press A, then left arrow. And I'm going to go here and tick switch depending on analog input level. And for the first percentage, I'm going to put 80%. For the second, I'm going to put 100. And now if you've ever played Oblivion on the PC before, you'll notice that you can hit caps lock to enable always run, or you can hold the shift key to switch between running and walking. Now this is basically what we have here. When you press the analog stick in less than 80%, your character is going to walk, and when you press it in all the way, he's going to run. So I'm just going to configure this for each direction on the left analog stick. Okay, now that I'm done configuring this, I got to point out that I actually kind of ignored the fact that I mapped the arrow keys. And this is because when I hit left analog stick, I also wanted to hit the arrow keys so that I can kind of move through menus using the analog stick. And we're also going to do this for the D-pad, so it's really up to you when you're playing the game whether you use the analog stick or the D-pad. I just prefer to have that option to use both. Okay, so now we're going to map the right analog stick, and right now I'm going to go to left on the right analog stick. And obviously this is going to be cursor movement. And say I want it to be very basic and just turn cursor movement left to 100, that would make it incredibly difficult to kind of fine-tune the analog stick, which is a bit of a pain in the ass. So I like to use analog acceleration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move cursor movement down to -5, and then I'm going to use analog acceleration by 20 times. Now I want the vertical look to be a little less sensitive, so I'm going to actually keep the movement, the cursor movement at 5, but I'm only going to accelerate it by 10 times. And this is just a matter of preference. So it's no big deal if you like to fine tune it yourself. Just do whatever you feel comfortable with. I know how picky people are when it comes to analog stick sensitivity. So you do as you like. Now I'm mapping the triggers on the controller, and for anything using X input like a 360 controller or an Xbone controller, you're going to have it as an axis. For older controllers using direct input, they're actually going to be buttons. So I recommend just pressing the analog triggers to kind of make sure you know which trigger you're mapping. So I'm going to map the right trigger as left click, and I can do this a couple ways. I can go over to mouse and do mouse click left, or I can go to keyboard, right click it, mouse left click, or I can go assign special keys, mouse left click to key 1, assign. And those are just several different ways I can do it. And I'm going to click OK. And now right analog stick is left click. And I want left analog stick to be right click. And click OK there. And now I'm going to go down to the D-pad. Now I have 8-way D-pad configured for the hotkeys, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Right now, we're going to go map up on the D-pad to the up arrow, and I'm going to go to auto repeat, and I'm going to auto repeat that 10 times per second, and click OK. And what that does is, say like Oblivion's inventory, you notice that when you go over to your miscellaneous section with the keys and everything, you have to scroll for an eternity, and you don't want to be tapping up and down constantly. So this way it enables us to hold up or down on the D-pad to quickly scroll through all those items. And I've actually configured the scrolling speed to be a little bit faster than the 360s, because the 360, in my opinion, scrolls very slowly. Now there's no real reason to do that for left and right on the D-pad, so I'm just going to go ahead and map the right arrow for right, and the left arrow for left. And I forgot right here to do down, so I'm going to map down and auto repeat 10 times per second. Click OK. And I forgot to mention that you're going to want to check start auto repeat after a certain delay, and you can change that to however long you like it to be. So this just means when I press up on the D-pad, it won't initially auto repeat and keep tapping it. I'll have to hold it for a certain period of time for it to start repeating. And I want to do that for up and down on the left D-pad. Sorry, I initially forgot about that, but there we go. Otherwise, when you hit up and down to scroll through menus, it's going to do it very, very quickly, and it's not going to give you a lot of time to react. Now, for button 1, you're going to want that. Well, if you went ahead and changed your Oblivion keyboard controls like I did in the beginning of the video to be a little more like Skyrim, you're going to want button 1 to be E, and for the second input, you're going to want it to be Enter. If you didn't change the configuration for Oblivion, you're going to want it to be space instead, but mine is E. Button 2 is B on the Xbox controller, on either the Xbox 360 or Xbox One controller. So that's tab to get to our inventory. Now, again, if you're using a different controller, you just want to make sure you're mapping the correct button by pressing the button on the controller and seeing which one is highlighted. Now, X is going to be R to ready our weapon, but again, if you didn't change your controls like I did in the beginning of the video, you want that to be F. And then we're going to have it be Shift for the second input, then Enter, and then click OK. And the reason for that is when we want to transfer items between inventories, when you're looting a corpse, or when you want to drop an item, on the keyboard you have to hit Shift and Enter. The only other way to do that on keyboard and mouse is to hold Shift and left click, but you don't want to have to be moving the mouse around with the right analog stick because that's a bit of a pain in the ass. Now, unfortunately, if you use an EMB, you're a bit screwed because you may know that you have to hit Shift and Enter to go bring up the EMB settings. So every time you drop something or you change things between inventories, you're going to bring up those EMB settings. So I typically don't use an EMB anyway. I use Oblivion Reloaded, which has a bunch of EMB features. But if you use an EMB, you're going to have to either keep your keyboard and mouse close and just Shift and left click to drop something or to change between inventories, or you're going to have to use the right analog stick to control the cursor and do it that way, which is a bit of a pain in the ass, to be honest. So button 4, which is Y on the Xbox 360 and Xbox One controller, is going to be space. Now, again, if you didn't change your configuration like I did, you're going to want that to be E. Button 5 is the left bumper, and we're going to go over to special, and we're going to go switch to joystick 2 whenever we hit left bumper. And that basically, whenever we hold left bumper, we get a whole new option of things. So say for whatever reason that I want to cast a spell whenever I hold left bumper and hit A, I would go ahead and map button 1 on joystick 2's configuration to C, which is cast. So if you can kind of get an idea for that, you're basically, while holding left bumper, switching to this whole configuration. Only while holding it, not while tapping it or anything like that, so keep that in mind. But we'll get into that later. Now for button 6 is normally cast, but we're also going to want that to be grab. So what you can do is go over to keyboard 2, hit C, then for input 2, hit Z, and then what I want to do is switch depending on how long the button is pressed. I usually like to keep it about 2 seconds, so you have to hold the right bumper for 2 seconds to actually grab something, so that's 2,000 milliseconds, and then I click OK. Button 7 is select, and that's usually wait, so go over to T. Button 8 is start, so that's going to be escape. Button 9 is left click on the left analog stick. So we want that to be crouch, so we just hit the control key. You can right click and do left control, it doesn't really make a difference with Oblivion. And button 10 is right stick click. Now if you didn't change your configuration like I did in the beginning, you're going to want this to be R. However, again, I changed it, so I'm going to want this to be F. Now we're done configuring joystick 1's configuration. Now we're going to go ahead and map joystick 2, which will be all the keys that are pressed when we hold left bumper, which is useful obviously for multiple inputs, and if you have a game like Oblivion actually that has several keyboard shortcuts that you want to go ahead and map. Stick 1, actually the whole left analog stick is going to be the same as joystick 1, so let me do that real quickly, and I'll explain that in a second why we're doing that. Alright, for stick 2 left and right, we're going to want it to be first shift, and then for stick 2 left, we're going to want it to be left arrow. Then shift right for pressing right on the right analog stick. And this, when you're in the Oblivion menus on PC, when you hold shift and hit an arrow key, you can switch between magic, character, inventory, and kind of map and quest, which makes moving around the inventory a lot better. For the right analog stick up and down, we're going to want that to be the mouse wheel so that we can, in third person, move the camera farther away and closer to our character. So I'm going to go to mouse. Wheel rotation is actually inverted. So for up, I want it to be -50. And for down, I want it to be +50. Alright, and for the triggers, we're going to want them to be the same as they were on joystick 1. And now we're going to go to the point of view, which is going to be our hotkeys. So I'm going to map the hotkeys right now, so that when we hold left bumper and hit a direction on the D-pad, it'll go ahead and equip our hotkey. So the reason we kept stick 1, the left analog stick, the same, and the left and right click for the triggers the same as joystick 1 is because hypothetically in combat, if I wanted to hotkey and quickly switch to a healing spell as I held left bumper, if I didn't keep these the same, their functions would change. So I'd hold left bumper and hit right to equip my healing spell, and if I happen to move the left analog stick or hit one of the triggers, whatever function is mapped to those on joystick 2 would actually occur. Now for button 1, I want that to be F1. Button 2 I have as F3. Button 3 I have as F2. Button 4 I have as F4. And the function keys on PC usually bring you quickly to either your character menu, your map, your inventory, or your magic menu. So when I hold left bumper and hit either A, B, X, or Y, it'll automatically quickly go to my map and quest journal or my inventory, and so on and so forth. So A is going to be your character menu, B I have as my magic menu, X I have as inventory, and Y I have as the journal. Alright, and button 6, I'm going to make caps lock. So when I load up a game, Oblivion can't really make up its mind whether it wants me to be in the always run mode or not. So this way, if I'm not in the always run mode, I can hold left bumper, then hit right bumper, and I can switch between always run on and off. Button 7 is select. So when I hold left bumper and hit select, I actually want that to be quick load, and when I hold left bumper and start, I want that to be quick save, which is F5. And that is it. Now I know this actually seems really complicated, but I've been playing it after playing with it initially for, I don't know, a few hours. It became second nature. There are a couple of catches that I like to mention just so they don't catch you off guard. Now when you're at the Oblivion start menu, do not use the left analog stick to select continue, load, whatever, because it will, when you go to load, ask you if you want to delete your game. I do not know why this is. It's just a bit of a bug. So just use the D-pad to select continue or load or start a new game. Also, when persuading somebody, you have to use either the right analog stick to select intimidate or so on, or you have to just take control of the mouse. The same goes for haggle. You can't reach a haggle menu with the arrow keys or the D-pad, so you have to either use a mouse to click on haggle or use the right analog stick. Lastly, when bartering, Oblivion will just randomly decide that the D-pad switches between the merchant's inventory and your inventory as opposed to holding left bumper and using the right analog stick, which is what it normally should do. This is a glitch on Oblivion side, as are all the kind of control bugs that I've mentioned. Not sure why they exist, but they do, so just keep those in mind.